In this lesson, we're going to go ahead and write all of the on-click methods for the toggle buttons as well as the loop button that we have on the bottom of our layout. So if I click on the activity main.xml, I need to write the code for each one of these buttons, and then also I need to write code for this image button at the bottom that'll indicate whether or not the music will loop or it will not loop based on this selection. So when I'm running the application and I click the E button, I want to play the E string or the E sound on my application. If I pick the loop, I want that sound to loop over and over and over again. So let's go ahead and begin by writing all of the code that we need to make this happen. I'm going to switch over to the main activity.java file. And I'm going to go to the very top here. I need to create a couple objects to work with. So before the onCreate method, I'm going to go ahead now and create an image button object called ibtn loop. We'll link that to that loop indicator at the bottom of our layout. I am going to need to import the image button, so I'll just hover over image button, import. Alright, another thing that I need to create is a MediaPlayer object. So I'll do a MediaPlayer. Let's just call this one MP for MediaPlayer guitar. I'll go ahead and end that with a semicolon. And again, I will need to import the MediaPlayer. And then the last item that I want to add in here is a Boolean variable. It's going to determine whether or not the loop button was selected, and it's going to store the value of either true or false, or on or off. So let's go ahead and create Boolean, and I'll just call this one loop indicator, and that with the semicolon. And now let's go ahead and begin by adding some code within the onCreate method. So I'll just come down here after I've already linked the toggle buttons, and let's go ahead and link that ibtn loop to the image button on our layout. Image button, and then find view by ID r.id. And we have that one named as image button 1. And I'll go ahead and end that with a semicolon. And what I'll do now is just set up, whenever the activity is created, I'll set up the MediaPlayer to, by default, already configure itself to play one of the strings. And I'm going to go ahead and just use the string E6, which was the first one on our layout. So let's go ahead and configure the MediaPlayer for just that. MP guitar equals new MediaPlayer. And I'll go ahead and put an opening and closing parenthesis and end that with a semicolon. And then MP guitar equals MediaPlayer dot create. And then the context, I'm just going to write this, comma, and then I need to have some music for this option, which I do not have linked to my application yet. So let's go ahead and move over some music for our application. I'm going to go ahead and restore down my Eclipse, and on my desktop I have MP3s of all of the different sounds that I'm going to be working with, and I'm just going to move them over to our resources folder. And by default, Eclipse does not have the raw folder created that I need to move the files to, so I'm going to go ahead and right click on the resources folder. I'm going to choose new folder, and I'm going to call this one raw, and hit finish. And all of my audio files are going to go in the raw folder. So I need to highlight these and move all of those over to the raw folder. And I do want to copy them into my project, so I hit OK. If I expand the raw folder, I can see all of my MP3s are now currently in my application. I'm going to go ahead and expand that. I'll come inside my parentheses here now on my code, and let's go ahead and do r dot, and I'm not going to do an ID this time. I'm actually going to pull from the raw folder, so I'm going to type in raw dot, and I have my MP3s here to choose from now. I'll just go ahead and pick the string E6 first. I'll end that with a semicolon. Okay, our media player is actually now configured and even has a default sound to play. What I want to code now is whenever the toggle buttons are clicked, I want to be able to have the media player play that sound that relates to that button. So I'm going to come down here, and after the on options item selected, which if I highlight that, I can see ends there. I'm going to go ahead and create some new methods down here. So I'll set up the first one, public void, and this one's going to be on toggle E6 click. We'll do view V, opening curly brace, and I'll hit enter, and that'll set up the closing curly brace. I do need to import the view. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and write my code. Now to start with, if I do MP guitar dot, then I can put in there media player. This is going to be the exact same line of code that I had up here for my on create, which you can see right there. Dot create, opening parenthesis, this comma r dot raw dot string E6, and then come out with a semicolon at the end. If I hover over media player, I have MP guitar dot should be equals media player dot create. There we go. And I'll go ahead and hit enter, and I'll go ahead now and type in MP guitar dot set looping. Now I get to set whether or not I want this loop to be on or off, and you can see that it's going to be asking for a boolean. So I'm going to go ahead in parentheses and use that boolean we had created at the top, which was loop indicator. There we go. I'll go ahead and end that with a semicolon. Now loop indicator we didn't actually set a value to. If I come up here to the top, loop indicator is a boolean with no value. So let's go ahead and set a value to it. I'll just come into the on create and add that one in there as well. Loop indicator equals false. So by default, loop indicator will be false, which means the looping for my sound will be set on default to false unless this variable has been changed to true. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and hit enter again, and we'll just type in MP guitar dot start and end that with a semicolon, and that's going to go ahead and start the music. Alright, that's all the code that I need here for the media player to play. Now I'm thinking ahead a little bit. If for whatever reason I have a toggle button selected and then quickly push another toggle button, it'll go ahead and play both sounds at the same time, and I may not want that. So let me go ahead and just to start off with, prevent that by whenever a button is first clicked, before anything else happen, we tell the media player to stop what it's doing. So we'll add that code at the very beginning there. Alright, so this is my method. I'm going to actually copy that, come back down here, and we'll paste another one in here. Let's make our changes. On toggle A click, and we want to change this not to string E6 but to A, and everything looks good there. Come down here and do another one. This one was D. I'll come through here and string D, and now let's go ahead and paste it again, and this one is going to be G, and I'll come down through here, put G, paste another method, B, the letter B, and then the last one is E1. I'll change that to E1. Okay. And just to point out, I did say to stop it at the very beginning. That's one of the reasons why up here at the top I actually set a value to the media player, is because if I end up doing something like telling it to stop, I don't want it to error out. So I've actually set content to it. I don't want it to have nothing set to it and then tell it to stop and it didn't have anything already configured. So that's one of the reasons why I configured it up here at the beginning as well. Switch back down here to the bottom, and let's go ahead now and create our method to handle the loop for the image button. If I switch back over to activity main.xml and I look at that image button, let's go over to the code. That image button, looks like I'm going to have to scroll up. That image button is calling on button loop click. So we'll switch back over to our Java code. Public void on button loop click. View v. I go ahead and start the curly brace and hit enter. And we're going to write a conditional statement to check to see if the Boolean is true. If it is true, we want it to be false. And if it's false, we want it to be true. So we want to switch the value every single time that button is selected. So I'll just write an if statement here. If, and we'll say loop indicator equals true. I'll come outside of here and hit enter with an opening curly brace. Let's just say, let's change it to false. Loop indicator equals false. And at the same time, while I'm writing code for this, let's just tell the media player to stop if it's doing something. That way, if it was in a loop, it'll stop playing the sound that it was playing. Alright, and then the last thing I want to add in here is ibtn loop. That's that image button for the loop itself. I want to change the icon, so we'll do set image resource. It's a new method for us to work with. That's going to be able to change the image for that image button, and I need to choose r.drawable. That's in the drawable folders. And you can see that here are my options: the launcher, the loop, the stop loop. I want it to be the loop for this one. I'll end that with a semicolon. And now for my if statement, it's either going to be true or false. So if the loop indicator is true, it's going to execute this code. If I now use the keyword else, it'll execute code if it's false. So let's go ahead and open with a curly brace and I'll hit enter. And then within the else part of this, let's go ahead and say loop indicator equals true. And then also let's go ahead and change the ibtn loop to set the image resource. And this one is going to be r.drawable.ic underscore stop underscore loop. And we'll end that with a semicolon. Okay, the reason why I didn't add the stop here, which I could easily just add that line of code in there as well, is because if the loop button was turned off, that sound will then just continue to play until it's done that single time. However, if the loop was already turned on and it's playing, we want to go ahead and tell it to stop so that the media player does not continue in an endless loop over and over again, even though we have set everything else to being false. I'm going to go ahead and save my activity. And it's now time to test our application. So I'll come up here to the top, choose Guitar Tuner. Okay, if I look at our application now, I can see that if I click the electric tab, nothing is in here, as well as the bass tab. That's because we didn't set up anything for either of those two types of guitars. We just have the acoustic set up. If I click on the E string, you can hear the sound playing. Now let me go ahead and try a different one. Let's try D. You can see here there's a couple things that I still need to fix. I did not deselect the toggle button for E when I pressed D, so I'm going to have to fix that one. As well as, let's go ahead and try the loop. And you can see as I'm pushing the loop button, nothing's happening. So I've got a couple errors. Well, let's go ahead and figure out what those errors were in our code. And if I go back to the code and take a look at the activity, this is an equal sign, and it should be two equal signs for comparison. The double equal sign is going to be used to compare to see if this is true, and the single equal sign will be used to set the value. So I messed up when I typed that in there. The second thing that I have is I never told our toggle buttons to deselect themselves whenever another toggle button was selected. So if I go up here to my toggle button for the E6, I'm going to go ahead and space down a couple. I need to tell the Android system to uncheck or unselect those toggle buttons that may have been previously selected. So I'm just going to go ahead and start off with the TBTN E6 dot, and that's our toggle button for E6. Actually not for E6, let's do A, because we are currently working with E6. So we'll do A dot, we're going to go ahead and change the set checked to false. I'll go ahead and put a semicolon at the end of that, and I'm going to go ahead and copy that code, and we'll paste it for the other buttons as well. So this is A, D, G, B, and E1. Alright, I'm just going to go ahead and copy that in there and paste that down in the next one. Since I'm working now with A, I no longer need A, but I need E6 to turn off. D, G, B, and E1. I'll come down here to the next one, which is for the D string. And I'll go ahead and turn off A, turn off D. I won't turn off D, so let's make that one the E6. I'll just go ahead and move that up. There we go. Alright, I'll come back down here to the next one. This is the G button. So I'll turn off A, D, G. I'll turn that to E6. The next button is the B button. So I'll paste that in there for the B button. And that one is, and I'll change B to E6. Move that up. And the next one is the E1 button. So I'll go ahead and come down here and paste that in. And rather than turning off E1, I'm going to turn off E6. Okay, E6, A, D, G, B, and then not the E1. That should turn off all the other toggle buttons now whenever one of them is selected. And now let's go ahead and run our app, and we should now be ready. Save my changes. And now that our application is loaded, let's try it again. If I click E, it plays the E sound. If I click the button down here for the loop, you'll see that the symbol has now been changed. Now if I click E again, you can see that it loops. Now let's try A. And if I turn it off, the loop will stop. And if I click D, you'll see the toggle switch over to D. Now G, B, and the last one I'll do the E. And that concludes the lesson. The only thing that I'd want to change now is I want to make sure that the screen is always in a vertical orientation. So in the next lesson, I'm going to go ahead and lock the screen to always being vertical and not allowing for the user to rotate the screen whenever their device is rotated.